The desolate canyon near Fort Apache had witnessed countless tragedies, but what rancher Daniel Hayes discovered on that scorching afternoon in 1885 would test every principle he held sacred. A lone Apache warrior lay dying beneath the merciless Arizona sun, abandoned by his own war party and left to face death without honor. What Daniel chose to do next, defying territorial law, military orders, and the hatred that defined frontier relations, would set in motion events that would bring an entire Apache village to his doorstep at sunrise. His act of simple human decency would challenge everything both cultures believed about enemies, honor, and the sacred bonds that transcend the boundaries of war. Chapter 1. Death in the Canyon. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Skeleton Canyon as Daniel Hayes guided his horse through the narrow passage that served as a shortcut between his struggling ranch and the nearest trading post. August heat shimmered off the red rock walls, creating waves that distorted the landscape into something resembling the surface of hell itself. At 35, Daniel had endured 15 brutal Arizona summers. But the scorching afternoon of 1885 tested even his weathered constitution as he searched for stray cattle that had wandered from his meager herd. Daniel was examining hoof prints in the sandy wash when movement caught his peripheral vision, something that didn't belong among the scattered boulders and thorny desert vegetation. His hand instinctively moved toward the Winchester rifle secured in his saddle holster as he peered through the heat waves at what appeared to be a dark mass lying motionless against the canyon wall. As he approached with the caution that frontier survival demanded, the shape resolved into something that made his breath catch in his throat. An Apache warrior lay sprawled in the meager shade of an overhanging rock ledge, his powerful frame reduced to a broken remnant of what had once been formidable strength. Blood had pooled beneath his body, dark stains marking the sandy ground where life had slowly drained away under the punishing desert sun. The warrior's clothing identified him as someone of significance within Apache society, his buckskin garments decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of high tribal status. Silver ornaments caught the harsh light, their craftsmanship representing wealth and position that few Apaches possessed. Most telling of all were the ritual scars visible on his exposed arms, ceremonial markings that designated him as a proven fighter who had earned respect through combat prowess. Daniel's military experience from his cavalry days allowed him to read the evidence scattered around the dying man. Multiple arrow wounds suggested he had been shot by his own people, while the deliberate positioning of his weapons indicated this had been no random attack. Someone had stripped away his medicine bundle and war paint, traditional acts that accompanied the most serious form of Apache punishment, complete banishment from tribal protection. The warrior's eyes flickered open as Daniel dismounted, dark pupils focusing with difficulty on the white stranger who had discovered him in this desolate place. Despite his critical condition, the Apache maintained the stoic dignity that characterized his people's approach to death, accepting his fate without complaint or plea for assistance. His lips moved soundlessly, attempting to communicate something of vital importance even as consciousness began to fade. Daniel faced a choice that would define not only the remainder of this scorching afternoon, but potentially the rest of his life on the frontier. Territorial law viewed all Apaches as hostile enemies, while military regulations demanded immediate reporting of any contact with tribal members. The smart decision involved riding away quickly and informing authorities about the location of this dying warrior's body. Yet something in the man's eyes spoke of honor that transcended the brutal realities of frontier warfare, dignity that commanded respect regardless of racial boundaries or political allegiances. Chapter 2. The Sacred Burial. Daniel knelt beside the dying Apache warrior, offering water from his canteen to lips cracked by desert heat and approaching death. The man's breathing came in shallow gasps that spoke of internal injuries too severe for frontier medicine to address. Yet his eyes remained alert with intelligence that demanded respect. Through broken English mixed with Apache words, the warrior managed to communicate his name, Standing Wolf, and his status as a war leader who had been cast out for refusing to attack a peaceful settlement. Standing Wolf's banishment had resulted from his opposition to a planned raid against innocent families, a stance that tribal hardliners had viewed as cowardice rather than wisdom. The arrow wounds in his back told the story of his own warrior's judgment, executed according to ancient laws that demanded absolute obedience to war council decisions. His medicine bundle had been destroyed, his weapons broken, and his name struck from tribal memory as punishment for what they considered the ultimate betrayal. As death approached with the certainty of desert sunset, Standing Wolf gripped Daniel's wrist with surprising strength, his eyes conveying desperate urgency about something that transcended personal survival. Through labored whispers, he revealed the location of his hidden burial goods, possessions prepared years earlier according to Apache tradition for the journey to the afterlife. These sacred items lay concealed in a nearby cave, waiting for ceremonies that his own people would now never perform. Daniel understood the profound significance of what Standing Wolf was requesting. Apache burial customs demanded specific rituals to ensure safe passage to the spirit world, ceremonies that required days of preparation and intimate knowledge of tribal traditions. Without proper burial, the Apache believed the deceased would wander eternally between worlds, unable to find peace or join their ancestors in the sacred mountains. Standing Wolf died as the sun reached its zenith, his final breath escaping in a whisper that carried his spirit toward the harsh blue sky above Skeleton Canyon. Daniel sat beside the still form for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred and the obligation that now rested upon his shoulders. The dying warrior had entrusted him with responsibilities that no white man had ever been asked to fulfill. Following Standing Wolf's directions, Daniel located the hidden burial goods in a shallow cave protected by carefully arranged stones. The collection included ceremonial weapons, turquoise jewelry, eagle feathers arranged in specific patterns, and a painted shield that told the story of the warrior's victories and spiritual visions. Each item had been crafted with meticulous care, representing a lifetime of preparation for the sacred journey that death would eventually require. Daniel spent the remainder of the afternoon performing burial rituals based on his fragmentary understanding of Apache customs, guided by memories of ceremonies he had witnessed during his cavalry service. He positioned Standing Wolf's body facing east toward the sacred mountains, surrounded the grave with the ritual objects, and covered everything with stones arranged according to patterns he hoped honored tribal traditions. As evening shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, Daniel realized that his actions had crossed boundaries that frontier society would never forgive, while simultaneously fulfilling obligations that Apache law would recognize regardless of his race or previous allegiances. Chapter 3. Word spreads fast. The desert wind carried more than sand and heat across the Arizona territory. It carried information through networks that moved faster than any telegraph wire could transmit. Within hours of Standing Wolf's burial, Apache scouts had discovered the carefully arranged grave site and the unmistakable signs of ceremony performed by inexperienced but respectful hands. The positioning of stones, the placement of sacred objects, and the eastward orientation of the body told a story that would resonate throughout Apache society. Daniel returned to his ranch unaware that his actions had already been observed and reported. 3 Apache hunters had been tracking game through Skeleton Canyon when they discovered the burial site, immediately recognizing the ritual significance of what they found. The grave's construction clearly indicated that a white man had attempted to honor Apache customs, an unprecedented act that demanded immediate attention from tribal leadership. The hunters carried word to their village with the supernatural speed that Apache communication networks had perfected over generations of warfare and survival. Each detail of the burial was described precisely. The careful arrangement of Standing Wolf's possessions, the stone patterns that approximated sacred designs, and most importantly, the evidence that someone had spent considerable time ensuring the warrior received proper treatment despite being banished from tribal protection. Meanwhile, military authorities at Fort Apache were conducting their own investigation into reports of Apache activity in the region. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had received intelligence about a missing war party and unusual movement patterns that suggested significant tribal agitation. His patrols had been searching for signs of hostile preparation, unaware that they were investigating the aftermath of internal Apache justice rather than preparations for warfare. Territorial settlers added their own complications to the unfolding situation through rumors and speculation that transformed simple facts into dangerous fiction. Reports of Apache graves discovered near white ranches triggered fears about secret alliances and potential uprising preparation. Daniel's neighbors began viewing him with suspicion, wondering why Apache ceremonial sites would appear so close to his property without his knowledge or involvement. Federal marshals joined the investigation as territorial authorities sought to determine whether Daniel's ranch had become a meeting point for hostile Apache planning. Marshal Thompson's inquiries in nearby towns had uncovered contradictory stories about mysterious Apache activity and unusual burial practices that seemed to center around the isolated rancher who lived near Skeleton Canyon. The situation grew more complex as Apache spiritual leaders recognized the profound implications of a white man performing sacred burial rites for a banished warrior. Medicine Man Gray Elk called for immediate council meetings to discuss the unprecedented circumstances and determine appropriate responses to such extraordinary respect for tribal customs. The old man's wisdom carried enormous influence throughout Apache society, making his interpretation of these events crucial for determining tribal reaction. As the sun set over Daniel's ranch, forces from multiple directions were converging on decisions that would either escalate tensions into open warfare or create opportunities for understanding that the frontier had never witnessed. Daniel tended his evening chores, completely unaware that his simple act of human decency had set in motion events that would transform his quiet existence into the center of historical significance that neither culture had anticipated. Chapter 4. The Village Arrives. Dawn broke over Daniel's ranch with an ethereal silence that spoke of forces beyond normal frontier experience. The usual sounds of desert wildlife had vanished completely, replaced by an otherworldly quiet that made the morning air feel heavy with anticipation. Daniel stepped onto his porch to check his livestock and froze at the sight that greeted him across the valley floor. Hundreds of Apache people had materialized during the night like spirits emerging from the earth itself. Men, women, children, and elders sat motionless on horseback, arranged in precise formations that stretched across the entire width of his property. They had positioned themselves without making a sound, their supernatural stealth allowing an entire village to surround his ranch while he slept peacefully inside his cabin. At the center of this impressive gathering sat an elderly Apache man whose bearing commanded immediate respect from every person present. Gray Elk, the most powerful medicine man in the territory, wore ceremonial clothing that marked him as someone who communicated directly with the spirit world. Eagle feathers adorned his silver hair, while turquoise and silver ornaments caught the morning light in patterns that seemed to dance with supernatural energy. Daniel's military experience told him that this massive gathering represented peaceful intentions rather than hostile preparation. The presence of women and children indicated ceremonial business, while the careful positioning of the crowd suggested respect rather than aggression. Most telling of all, every warrior present had weapons secured rather than ready for combat, creating an atmosphere of solemnity that transcended the usual tensions between cultures. Gray Elk dismounted with ceremonial precision, his movements calculated to demonstrate respect for both Apache tradition and Daniel's property rights. The medicine man approached alone while hundreds of tribal members maintained perfect silence, their discipline evident in their motionless observation of the unfolding ceremony. His weathered face bore the wisdom of 70 winters spent navigating the treacherous politics of territorial survival. When Gray Elk spoke, his voice carried across the morning stillness with authority that commanded attention from every person present. His words, delivered in careful English, revealed that Standing Wolf had been his own son, a war leader whose opposition to senseless violence had cost him tribal acceptance, but had earned his father's secret pride. The medicine man's presence meant that Daniel's burial ceremony had triggered spiritual obligations that superseded normal tribal politics. Daniel found himself at the center of an unprecedented gathering that would determine not just his own fate, but the future relationship between Apache and settler communities throughout the territory. Chapter 5. Ancient Debts and Honor. Gray Elk's weathered hands traced symbols in the dusty earth as he began revealing the sacred laws that governed Apache responses to unprecedented acts of mercy. His voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom as he explained how Daniel's burial of Standing Wolf had invoked spiritual obligations that transcended the normal boundaries between enemy peoples. According to tribal traditions older than memory itself, any person who honored Apache dead with proper ceremony became bound to the tribe through a sacred debt that could never be repaid through conventional means. The medicine man's revelation went deeper than simple gratitude for respectful treatment of his son's remains. Standing Wolf had been cast out for refusing to participate in raids against innocent settlers, a stance that had earned him banishment from tribal protection, but had also marked him as someone guided by spiritual wisdom rather than bloodlust. His death in exile should have meant eternal wandering between worlds, but Daniel's careful burial ceremony had provided the ritual passage that his own people had denied him. Gray Elk described visions that had come to him during the night following his son's burial, dreams that revealed the spiritual significance of a white man performing sacred Apache rites. The spirits had shown him scenes of future peace between the cultures, mediated by individuals who possessed the courage to honor their enemies' sacred customs despite the risks such actions entailed. Daniel's willingness to spend precious hours learning and performing unfamiliar rituals had demonstrated the kind of character that could bridge the hatred dividing the frontier. More profound still was the medicine man's explanation of ancient prophecies that spoke of white and Apache people finding common ground through shared respect for the sacred nature of death and burial. Standing Wolf's banishment had been orchestrated by hostile elements within the tribe who sought to perpetuate warfare for personal gain, but his honorable death and proper burial had fulfilled spiritual requirements for a new kind of relationship between traditional enemies. The territorial implications of Daniel's actions extended far beyond personal recognition or tribal gratitude. Gray Elk commanded respect from Apache bands throughout the Southwest, his spiritual authority carrying more weight than military leaders or political chiefs. His interpretation of Daniel's burial ceremony would influence tribal policy across hundreds of miles of contested territory, potentially ending cycles of retaliation that had consumed the region in blood for decades. Daniel listened with growing amazement as Gray Elk revealed the complex web of spiritual law and political consequence that a simple act of human decency had triggered. The medicine man explained how Apache society recognized different categories of debt and obligation, with sacred duties superseding normal tribal boundaries or racial prejudices. By honoring Standing Wolf's remains according to tribal custom, Daniel had earned recognition as someone worthy of protection and respect regardless of his cultural background. The old medicine man's final revelation carried implications that would reshape Daniel's entire existence on the frontier. Apache law demanded that such extraordinary mercy be rewarded through adoption in a tribal society, creating bonds of kinship that would provide legal protection while establishing responsibilities that extended throughout Daniel's remaining lifetime. The ceremony required for such adoption would transform him from an isolated rancher into a recognized member of Apache society with rights and obligations that territorial law would be forced to acknowledge. Chapter 6. Bridge Between Worlds. The adoption ceremony that transformed Daniel Hayes from an isolated rancher to an Apache brother lasted 3 days, conducted according to traditions that predated European arrival in the Americas. Gray Elk led the rituals with ceremonial precision, marking Daniel's skin with sacred symbols that would identify him permanently as someone under tribal protection. The scarification process represented spiritual rebirth, creating bonds that Apache law considered more binding than blood relationships established through birth. Daniel's transformation extended beyond symbolic recognition to encompass genuine responsibilities that would define his remaining years on the frontier. His ranch became neutral ground where Apache families could conduct business with territorial merchants under federal protection, while his unique status provided legitimacy that prevented either culture from viewing such activities as threatening or suspicious. The medicine man's blessing carried enormous weight throughout Apache society, making Daniel's word valuable in negotiations that had previously been impossible. Within months, Daniel's success as a cultural mediator attracted attention from territorial authorities seeking alternatives to the costly military campaigns that had consumed the region in violence for decades. His ability to communicate Apache concerns while maintaining credibility with settler communities made him invaluable for resolving disputes that would otherwise escalate into warfare. Federal officials recognized that his unique position could prevent the conflicts that had devastated other territories. Gray Elk's prophecies found fulfillment through cooperation rather than continued hostility, proving that individual acts of mercy could reshape entire political landscapes. Daniel's willingness to honor standing wolves remains according to tribal custom had created opportunities for understanding that military force alone could never achieve. The bridge between worlds that began with a simple burial ceremony established precedents that would influence frontier relationships for generations to come. The transformation of Daniel Hayes from lonely rancher to Apache brother became territorial legend, demonstrating that courage and respect could transcend the deepest cultural divisions when supported by a genuine commitment to justice rather than conquest. This incredible tale of honor conquering hatred shows how one act of decency can unite divided worlds. If this story of Daniel and the Apache village moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing frontier legends. Drop a comment about what you would have done in Skeleton Canyon. These forgotten heroes continue shaping our understanding of true courage.